Thank you for joining us for the 5th installment of the Flatten the Curve of Inequality webinar series, Education Equity in the Age of COVID-19. Tonight's webinar will address how the county's response to COVID-19 is not just about flattening the curve of infection rates, but also the inequities that are deepened in our education system by the pandemic. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items. We are offering ASL and Spanish interpretation tonight. Anthony and Andrea of Interpret That will be providing ASL interpretation. They will be trading off interpretation roles. While we are screen sharing, please click View Options at the top of your screen and select Side-by-Side mode. And be sure the interpreter who is currently signing is on screen for you. Andrea Rocha will be providing Spanish interpretation. Please dial 1-833-548-0282. Meeting ID 219-075-8904# and mute your computer and telephone. David will now repeat these instructions in Spanish.
Esta noche estamos ofreciendo interpretación en español. Marque al 833-548-0282, código de acceso 219-075-8904 y el signo del gato para audio en español, y silencie su computadora y su teléfono. Si tiene una pregunta para un panelista, envíe su pregunta con el botón Preguntas y Respuestas o por las siglas Q y A. No dude en escribir sus preguntas y comentarios en español.
If you have a question for a panelist, please submit your question using the Q&A button. It would be helpful to include who your question should be directed to. Please feel free to write down your questions or comments in Spanish. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible, but may not get to all given time constraints. There is also a chat box. All the messages sent to the chat box can only be seen by the panelists. Attendees will not be able to message each other in this webinar. If you want to send affirmations or commentary, you are welcome to do so in the chat. If you have any technical difficulties, we also welcome you to ask your tech question in the chat. Someone will be monitoring from our staff for tech questions and will assist if you need help. But again, if you have questions for the panelists, please submit those using the Q&A button. Finally, when you leave the webinar, you will be directed to a survey asking for your feedback. Please do share your feedback with us. So let's get started. COVID-19 has dramatically altered what education looks like for our students. In response to Governor Newsom's shelter-in-place orders, school districts across our country and county have closed, and many began implementing distance learning models. This new model has presented new and re-emphasized existing inequities in our schools. We know that all students and families should have consistent access to a quality education that sets them up to thrive and succeed. Our panelists tonight are all involved in the fight for equity in schools, and we are very excited to have them join us. I'm going to briefly go over the bios of each of the panelists before we get to questions. Our first panelist is Dr. Amir Whitaker. Amir is a policy attorney with the ACLU of Southern California. Prior to joining the ACLU, Amir represented students and incarcerated youth throughout Florida and Alabama for the Southern Poverty Law Center. Often referred to as Dr. Knucklehead, Amir was arrested at age 15 and eventually expelled from school. In 2014, Amir started Project Knucklehead to inspire vulnerable youth and help them reach their potential through education, music, and art programs. Welcome, Amir. Our next panelist is Nyota Watts, Got a Quaff. Nyota Watts is a 19-year-old Southern Sudanese no-table youth activist organizer in San Diego. She graduated from Morris High School and went on to complete her associate's degree in political science in 1 year, and now attends UCSD, where she is continuing to study political science with a focus on international relations. She is also currently organizing with the Defund School Police at San Diego Unified School District campaign. Welcome, Nyota Watts. Our next panelist is Warsan Artan. Warsan was raised in Nairobi, Kenya, and came to the United States when she was 10 years old. Warsan attended Helix Charter High School and then went on to San Diego State University. She graduated with a bachelor's in poli-sci and a minor in biology. Poli-sci is popular. While at SDSU, she served on the College of Sciences Student Council and then on the Associated Student Government for 2 consecutive years. Currently, she is the youth organizer for Youth Will. Welcome, Warsan. Our next panelist is Melissa De Leon. Melissa is a colleague of mine here at the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties. She is the equity staff attorney, where she works on education equity issues such as budget accountability, charter school accountability, school to prison pipeline, and LGBTQ rights. Before the ACLU, she was in private practice for 6 years, representing victims of injuries, including victims of police misconduct. She's been a board member of the National Filipino American Lawyers Association and is past president of the local Filipino American Lawyers Association. Welcome, Melissa. Our final panelist is Dr. J. Luke Wood. Dr. Wood will be joining us a little bit later in the webinar as he is running late from a meeting. Dr. Wood is a distinguished professor of education and vice president of student affairs and campus diversity at San Diego State University. Dr. Wood's research and practice agenda focuses on advancing diversification and equity initiatives at schools, colleges, and universities. He has delivered over 700 scholarly and conference presentations, authored over 100 publications, and 15 books. And we look forward to hearing from Dr. Wood later in the program. So as you can see, we have a fabulous lineup for you tonight, and we're gonna jump right in with Amir taking our first question. As a reminder to our panelists, please do remember to speak slowly for our interpreters tonight. Amir, can you please share with us about the challenges students have been facing in light of COVID-19?
Sure. Thank you all for hosting this conversation and allowing me to share the space. This is a very important question because we're facing what appears to be a new era in our schools and in our society, as all of us adults know. So we know this has impacted our physical health, impacted our mental health. And when it comes to our youth and most vulnerable, it's just exacerbated. They don't have many of the same skills and sometimes supports that we have. So here I actually want to do a screen share and share some of what our Youth Liberty Squad did here in Southern California. Are folks able to see my screen? Great. So this is our Youth Liberty Squad. We have been meeting with them throughout the crisis and throughout the pandemic virtually, and they've expressed how this has impacted students and specifically their mental health. So based off what they shared, we worked with them to create a survey that was then administered to over 600 students across the state, nearly 70 schools, and 50 school districts almost. And you can see from the map here, we San Diego and Imperial County were represented as well. And thank you all for sharing that tool. But to the left here, you see art, some student created who won our art contest that, you know, expresses how she feel and how the pandemic is impacting them. So on the left talks about some of the things they have in school, which, you know, access to counselors, even though, you know, it's 600 counselors for every student, but the ability to participate in extracurricular activities, one-on-one, hands-on assistance from teachers, et cetera. And then here on the right, it talks about what they're balancing at home, you know, the heavy inconsistent workloads, there's family issues, cancellation of events and different things. So I'm gonna share some of the survey findings. And to the left here is a word cloud. We asked the students to choose one word to describe, you know, their lives and the impact of the pandemic. And you can see here the most common was boring. Students said horrible, anxiety, trapped, depressing. And our students actually wrote a letter to the governor and state superintendent expressing these concerns. And our students said here, our survey indicates that students feel stressed, depressed, stuck, and a variety of unpleasant emotions. We asked students to describe how they felt in one word, and that's what that represents. This is just some of the media coverage from the survey and letter, and I'll include that in the links afterwards as well. But just some of the main findings, the key one is students now have a significantly increased need for mental health. We asked the students how would they rate their mental wellness before the pandemic, and most of them you see were up here 7s or 8s, some 10s, and we asked them to rate their mental wellness now during the pandemic, and unfortunately you see 1s here, and the mid-range 5s was the average, unfortunately. And you can see here on the right, you know, most students have said that the pandemic has caused them stress. So that answers some of the first question, and I'll share some of the data and info about this as well.
Thank you. One of the big takeaways from the survey, it looks like, was, you know, the need to address mental health needs. So what should school districts do to ensure that the needs of their students and families are being met now and when schools reopen?
Sure. So school districts, school boards have an obligation to prioritize, you know, supports for mental health. Here in California, we have the 48th highest student to counselor ratio in the nation. So students were already the least likely to have that support. And now in this post-COVID world, districts have to prioritize that more. So school boards themselves have to ensure that when they make cuts, because we understand all districts will have to make cuts, they find ways to preserve mental health. Then also they shift from law enforcement. So our ACLU SoCal, we released a report 3 months ago that showed in LA County, Riverside County, and San Bernardino County, 3 of the largest counties up here, nearly 40% of school districts are actually illegally spending money designated for high need students on law enforcement. And these funds should be spent on mental health and supports. So school districts have to make those direct investments.
Thank you. Another part of your work has been, you know, promoting not just investments in students and not just in LA, but nationwide. And you wrote another report called Counselors Not Cops. Can you talk about what were some of those findings and why those issues are important to talk about even during a pandemic?
Sure, absolutely. We had a really troubling finding in that report that showed, you know, 1.7 million students across the nation are in schools with police, but no counselor. And almost 400,000 of those students, or, you know, 1 out of 5 nearly, are here in California. So we are in the capital of youth criminalization here. One thing I want to show you all really quick, because I'm going to share this as well, is we created a tool at the ACLU of SoCal for you to see where these schools are. And I'm just going to type in San Diego County here. Each dot represents a school that has a police, but no counselor, nurse, social worker, and or psychologist. You see here Mount Carmel High, but you see there's no shortage of schools. Del Norte High, even there at the border, elementary schools are set up like this. So I'm going to share this tool. It's aclusocal.org/edjustice. But California is really almost like the headquarters, the capital of youth criminalization. So we really have to fight back here.
Thank you. That's a great tool for folks to know about. And before we move on to the next panelist, I want to remind our attendees to please write down your questions and put them in the Q&A box, and you can submit those in English and Spanish. Our next panelist will be Nyota Watts. Nyota Watts, the movement that you and other youth organizers have created locally here in San Diego around defunding school police at San Diego Unified has been inspiring to watch unfold. And the fact that you're doing this in the midst of a pandemic speaks to the importance of the issue. And that's why it was really important for us to have your voice on the panel tonight. And we're so glad that you accepted. Start with the basics. What do you mean when you say defund school police, and why is it important?
So thank you so much. I just want to first start off by saying thank you so much for having me here today. Just like Amir had said, it's an honor to be able to be in a space like this and to have the opportunity to speak on issues as such. But so to answer your question, what we mean by defunding the SDUSD police force is by we want the complete defunding of the force so that they could get out of our schools and we could reallocate those funds into welfare initiatives on campuses so that children can have more resources that they can rely on as in social welfare programs, ethnic studies courses, and having more Black and Indigenous teacher staffs and more on their campuses so that children are able to relate more to their administration experiences rather than only being criminalized upon on first meet basis. What we often see is that mental health is often confused with criminality on campus. So having more counselors in our public school systems will definitely help our students to get further and further ahead within society. And so by defunding school police, we're able to get our students from point A to point B without any hiccup on as to whether or not their future is successful. So that's what we mean by defund school PD.
Thank you. And you touched on this a little bit, but what are the larger implications that defunding school police have for marginalized students within the education system as a whole?
So some of the larger implications that would come with defunding San Diego Unified School District PD would be that you have more successful Black and Brown, Indigenous students within the school system. So just from the stats alone, what you see is that Black and Indigenous students have some of the highest retention rates when it comes to college admission right out of high school. So if you were able to, if we do defund SDUSD PD, we're able to reallocate those funds back into counseling forces so that they're able to utilize those resources to get the counselors to be able to get them to college, because what we often see is that many Black and Brown students are left behind within the system. And so what you see is that, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but what you see is that many of them fall behind and don't get into contact with their counselors because there's not enough of them. And so if we're able to defund SCPD, we're able to get more counselors for these students and then get them on a fast track so that once they graduate, they could go straight to college right after that. But also getting more ethnic studies courses and getting more Black and Indigenous teacher staff, like I had mentioned before, would be really crucial, as it would be able to have a better bonding experience with teacher-student connections. Well, you often see a disconnect within the school system. Personally, for me, myself, I had a very large disconnect with many of my administrators and teachers at my high school. So just being able to have that connection will basically secure my future in the end, because it shows that you have people who are willing to take the path to get you to your point of success. So that's basically it.
Great. So you mentioned that, after divesting from the police, some of the investments we could see would be in mental health counselors, different types of curriculum, other types of investments that should be prioritized for the school district.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I apologize.
No, it's okay. Are there other types of investments that should be prioritized for San Diego Unified?
So besides the social welfare programs, ethnic studies courses, and Black Indigenous teacher and staff and more, just also having more programs available for students of color and for students of color, along with just different resources that they're able to have. So just trying to fund more clubs and programs for them so that they're not involved in any criminalizing actions outside of their neighborhoods. Although gang violence is something that isn't much of an issue now, it definitely is something that does affect many of the low-income neighborhoods that I've basically been in myself. So investing into initiatives that are student-led and just always relying on student support and just trying to give students as much support as they can, and giving them opportunities that they can as well. Although with Corona, you do have SAT preps and all of those canceled for now, once those come back, if they eventually do, just funding money into that itself. There's no reason on as to why students from low-income communities should pay $100 for AP tests, SAT tests, and ACT tests. Funding those kind of programs and initiatives so they could get forth and get to successful points in their future is basically something that we would like to see as well. Seeing more youth-led initiatives being funded by the schools would be something that's great to see, on top of the ethnic studies courses, Black and Indigenous teacher staffs being hired, and social welfare programs and more. So yeah.
Thank you. And the last question for now. So you all had an action today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So today we had our Defund SDUSD PD Rally and / protest. And so we had started it off. We got a whole bunch of donations. So if you guys are people who donated, I thank you so much for everything you guys were able to do, whether it was monetary or whether you brought supplies. It helped us quite a bit. So I really appreciate that. But we circled back around the whole entire building twice, and we did our chants, and we called for the defunding of SDUSD PD, which could eventually lead to the complete defunding and removal from our schools. And we had multiple student panelists and speakers that were out there speaking on their experiences. And basically what I would like to uplift is that many of the Black speakers that we saw today had many of the same stories. And so just to highlight the fact that many of these students should not have these same stories. There should be no reason as to why we all have a run-in with the security at our school, or why we have a run-in with the police at our school, and so on and so forth. So being able to highlight those in front of a crowd of many non-Black POC and white people as well, which was really great to see our allies out there, was great, so that we were able to relay our message to them so that they know that they're able to protect us, and that they should be able to use their voices to advocate for us within our school systems, as we are often pushed to the side. So being able to be out there today was just great. We had many people from March for Black Women, SD, out there as well. And we had many different initiatives that were out there and coalitions. And so we appreciate everybody for their support. And it was a great turnout. And this is just the beginning. We're going to keep fighting until we could eventually get the full defunding and removal of SDUSD PD out of our schools.
Thank you. I have full faith that that is what's going to happen because of the energy that y'all are bringing.
Oh, we're bringing all the smoke. We're bringing all the heat. We really appreciate it.
Our next panelist would be Warsan. So we've heard from both Nyota Watts and Amir about the mental health issues facing our youth right now as we're in the middle of a pandemic. So with so much changing as a result of COVID, what should be done at the local level to ensure that the mental health of our youth are being prioritized?
Okay, to start off first, and I promise this will make sense in a moment, I want to talk about Youth Will and what we do here at Youth Will, just a short introduction. So Youth Will is a local nonprofit organization. We are a youth-led, youth-centered nonprofit organization. Our goal is to create a San Diego where every young person has what they need to be happy, healthy, and prepared to reach their potential. And we have 3 pillars. Those 3 pillars are to build youth power, to demand youth prioritization, and to improve youth development. And this is our Bill of Rights that's showing up here. So this was actually developed by some of our youth. It was and where we gathered the ideas from for the Bill of Rights is feedback from youth in our community. And as you can see, the Bill of Rights includes anything from access, the right to have access to housing, food, healthcare, education, and so on and so forth, as well as more or less tangible ideas such as the need for youth voice, the need for intergenerational communities. So I just wanted to put that out there because I promise it will make sense in a moment. But to go into the question, the first thing that I want to say is that this idea about like the lack of mental health in the COVID-19 didn't come out of nowhere. It was mentioned earlier that the inequities that exist today during the COVID-19 were already existent. They have only been exacerbated by the COVID-19, whether that is the lack of housing, so homelessness, whether that is the lack of food security, the lack of access to mental health resources. All of those issues were already existent in low-income communities and communities of color. They have just been exacerbated by the COVID-19. So to go into the issue with the lack of mental health resources, I want to just state a few statistics. Actually, this is straight from the ACLU's website. So 1.7 million students in schools are in schools that are policed but don't have access to counselors. 6 million students in schools are in schools with police but no psychologists. 10 million students are in schools with police but no social workers. So our schools were already like this. I just want to point that out. And then now that we're stuck at home and we are away from campuses, we are wondering why we not have access to resources, like mental health resources. And that's the reason why is because we were already lacking those resources. In addition to that, to bring a little bit closer to home, I want to point out what you all see on the here on the screen. This is actually a feedback that we gathered last summer. So last summer at Youth Will, we held 11 forums based on the 11 rights within our Bill of Rights. So we had, for example, a housing forum, a healthcare forum, a youth dignity forum, youth voice forum, and so on and so forth. They were based on our Bill of Rights. And in a lot of those forums, the issue with the lack of mental health resources was brought up again and again. As you can see, the first one, our Youth Dignity Forum, we had students who brought up the lack of mental health resources in schools, in youth centers, and so on and so forth. And their ask was to provide proportionate counselors and service providers in schools, in youth centers, and so on and so forth, in order for those counselors to have enough time to spend with young people. Our Youth Justice Forum, the students brought up issues such as the lack of mental health resources and mental health services in the criminal justice system. And their demand was to provide better mental health resources in the criminal justice system. In our housing forum, young people who have experienced homelessness, who have been through emergency shelters, brought up the need for mental health resources in homeless shelters, in emergency shelters, youth shelters, and so on and so forth. It was an issue that was brought up again and again. So I just wanted to point that out. Lastly, I want to point out that even in the cases where there may be a counselor in school, that doesn't necessarily mean the students know about it, right? So are we actually going into classrooms and telling students, hey, there's a counselor if you want to, if you need mental health services? I remember when I was somebody who was from an immigrant background, somebody who did not grow up in this country the first 10 years of my life, I didn't really know that you're supposed to, there was somebody who you can talk to if you need mental health resources, right? So actually in high school and middle school, I didn't know that we had a counselor. I thought the counselors were there to help you with your academics, and that's pretty much it. Because nobody ever told us there is a counselor at school that you can go to. But in addition to that, I also want to point out, even in the cases where we have mental health counselors, psychologists, or therapists in the schools, that does not mean they're necessarily culturally competent or they have that training in cultural competency. I remember I was talking to one young lady from Somali community who had a family issue, so she wants to see her counselor. And in the Somali community, what you have to understand is in order to raise the issue that point out the issue that her and her family difficulties. And when she told the counselor that the counselor's suggestion
I think we're experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties. So we will come back to Warsan and we'll move to Melissa De Leon. Melissa, so we know that the pandemic has impacted how schools are, reaching children, and this has been especially true for children with disabilities. Individualized education plans, or IEPs, are legal documents that schools working with parents and other professionals have to develop for students with disabilities to ensure that they have the necessary supports to be successful in school. How has distance learning impacted the development and implementation of IEPs? And have students had access to these services that are required by their plans?
Yes, thank you, Christy. It's an important question. I also want to say, firstly, that my dog has been barking this entire time, but just stopped. So if you hear some background noise here, I apologize in advance. As to the question, the move to distance learning created and more so initially, a lot of ambiguity regarding whether a student who had an existing IEP could get the services they need and are entitled to, and whether IEP meetings could go forward. And also, I should say, for folks who may not be as familiar, what is meant by services, that can be a range of anything such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, classroom aids, and many others. So when schools first closed, there was an initial suspension of all school services for all students. But since that time, both the CDE, the California Department of Education, and the US Department of Ed came out with really clear written guidance. And this guidance made very clear that even during the pandemic, children with disabilities should continue to receive all the services that they're entitled to as set forth in their IEP. And of course, to the extent possible and in accordance with public health guidelines. But there was never at any point a waiver or suspension of the rights of students with disabilities. And that right is very clear that these students have the right to a free and appropriate public education. And as to the second sort of part of the question about whether students are getting actual access. So it's clear that they have a legal right to services. The CDE has also made clear that there can be some flexibility in how services are adjusted and or administered. For example, if certain in-classroom supports are not available during this time. But based on what we're hearing from families and students, there seems to be a great variation in what is being offered across schools and districts in the state in terms of both quality and quantity. But the obligation of the school is very clear.
Thank you. Before we continue, reminder to our audience to please submit questions in the Q&A box. So what can school districts do to ensure that they are adequately adapting services to fit the distance learning model and supplementing any missed services?
Yes, there are lots of things that can be done. I think first I'll step back and say more broadly that whatever districts or schools do, it should be done with a lot of intention to honor the very sort of fundamental spirit of the law that governs in this case, which is the IDEA. And the purpose of the IDEA is to ensure that students with special needs make progress in education in light of whatever circumstances they're in. And so it really is important and remarkable. It is an affirmative right to progress in school for these students. And so understanding that not all services may be able to be provided because of the health crisis we're in, what schools should do is, if not done already, is convene meetings of a student's IEP team. And that would consist of the experts and teachers who are meant to create a plan to tailor to that student's specialized and individualized needs. And they should assess what services can be provided in light of school closures, what can be provided as an alternative or in a different form or additional method, and really answer the question, how do we meet the students' individualized needs during this time? And also to reiterate what I think every panelist before me has touched on and is really important is that schools really should be making individualized determinations as to whether a student may need service or support to maintain their mental health during this time. And students who have specialized needs often are the students who really need and require and benefit from the stability of the school experience and consistent relationships with adults and teachers and those supporting them in school settings. So keeping mental health in mind is also really critical. And there are, you know, again, routine follow-ups with families and a lot of communication is also key. There are a number of other suggestions. The ACLU of California put together a letter that expands on a lot of these things I'm talking about a lot more, and making suggestions as to what districts can do. And then just to also answer the last part of that question, that that things are different now, and so to the extent students with disabilities have any missed services or have any regression, there should be a sort of robust plan in place to make sure that compensatory education will be offered and created for these students when we're back in school.
Another issue that our office has received calls about has been in regards to the impact of school closures on English language learners. Can you tell us about what the issues have been that are facing this segment of our student population and their families?
Yes, I have sort of a shorter answer to this question, and it really is based on what we've all been hearing from parents and partners. But foremost, and this should be done all the time anyway by all the schools, is making sure all communications that go out to students and families are in the home languages of these families. And one of the things that comes up a lot is training and staff getting training on how best to support ELL students in this virtual model, which is very challenging. And then I will say that the most common sort of complaint or concern that we hear from parents consistently is communicating very clearly what the plans are to parents, and also also incorporating the feedback that parents are giving about the needs of their students, whether that be an English language learner or a student with a disability. And so it sounds really simple, but it is a recurring concern that we hear over and over again is the inability to get clear communication from schools and districts at times about what the plans are, and also to really address the requests for whatever the service and support is that this either a particular group of students or that their student needs.
Great, thank you, Melissa. I believe we're with us now. A reminder to all of our panelists to please speak slowly for our interpreters. And Warsan, if you had any last thoughts you wanted to wrap up on regarding Youth Will's work around mental health and education, please do. And then if you can also answer, how can we best center the voice of our youth in budget making decisions, whether it be at the school board or local government level? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about the tech difficulties. Yeah, so as I was saying, to finish up the last question, the last thing that I wanted to add is, even when we have counselors in schools, that doesn't mean that they have training in cultural competency. So it's important that counselors, especially counselors in schools that are majority low income, immigrant, Black and Brown communities, that they have that training. But to answer the question, I guess, what can we do to prioritize or to center young people, to prioritize the mental health of young people in our community? I would say listen to young people. The youth are telling us we don't need any more police in our schools. We need counselors, we need therapists, we need more teachers, we need more teachers that look like us. So therefore, listen to our youth and provide the needs that they're asking for. The person who knows the most about what they need are the person who's going through it, right? Students know the most about what their needs are in schools. So center the voice of young people and listen to our youth and our students. To go into the next question though, what we can do to center youth voice in our youth budget, in budget decision making. I'm gonna go back to my introduction to Youth Will. So I mentioned earlier that in Youth Will, we have 3 pillars, one of them being demanding youth participation. So in Youth Will, our ultimate goal is to create a San Diego where every decision maker, whether that is school, board level, or a county level, asks themselves, how does this impact young people? How does this impact our future, the future of our community, before they make any decision, before they make any pass any policies? They ask themselves that question. How does this impact young people, whether that is a child that was born today or a young graduate from college? How does this impact the young people in our community? That is the ultimate goal. But for now, what can we do to center young people's voices in the budget process? The first thing that I want to say about that is I don't think I've ever spoken to young people as a youth organizer that said, I feel like my voice is valued. I feel like my input is important to adults in my community. I feel like my opinions and my ideas are included in the decision-making process. So to that, I want to make 2 points really quick before I wrap up. The first thing is to give youth the opportunity to influence decision-making in the budget process. So that means doing the appropriate outreach to young people in our community when it comes to, for example, commissions and boards, whether that is a school level, whether that is city level, county level, to ensure that young people are on these boards and commissions and have the ability to influence decision makers. The second thing that I would say is give young people actual power to create change. So something that we have been working on at Youth Will is a youth participatory budgeting, which means giving young people the ability to actually control part of the budget and decide where that budget is spent on. This is not a novel issue. There's actually a youth participatory budgeting process in the city of Boston called Youth Leader Change, where young people in the city of Boston are in control of $1 million, and they decide where that money is spent. So the 2 things that I would recommend is first, give young people the opportunity to influence decision making, and actually give young people the power to create change and put them in decision making process places and put them on the table.
Thank you, Orsan. We now will move to Dr. Wood, who has joined us before we get to our audience Q&A. And just a reminder again for our speakers, please speak slowly as we do have interpreters. And for our audience members, if you do have questions, please submit them in the Q&A. Welcome, Dr. Wood. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
A lot of your research has looked at the education success of Black students and how schools are supporting or failing them. What has been your impression of the gaps in schools' response to COVID-19, and what are some of the ways we can work to address these gaps?
First of all, thank you for allowing me to come and also to pop in a bit later on. I really appreciate that. There has been many gaps that have been exposed in terms of what's taking place in our schools right now. Obviously, the most straightforward one is access to technology. We have students who are learning right now via distance in totally different conditions, whether they have computer resources at home, whether or not they have the proficiency to be able to use those resources, access to Wi-Fi, on top of other pressures that are also facing the same students in terms of, you have one person in one room trying to basically do their class, while over in the next room, they have their parent who's maybe working, maybe unemployed. So the pressures and intensity right now are unreal. And I would love to say that that's the only pressure and intensity that's going on, but we know that that's not. We are in the midst of both, as I'm sure others have said, a health pandemic as well as a racial pandemic. And as a result, there is incredible stress and anxiety that is also prevalent. On top of all that, we know that our Black students are unfortunately more likely to experience challenges with food insecurity, housing insecurity, and other types of insecurities that can make it difficult to be able to focus and do what they need to in school, especially when they are being engaged by teachers who generally perceive them as being unimportant, lesser than, who undervalue them and over-criminalize them. But I guess I could say the one positive thing that's happening right now. This year in San Diego County, we will have the lowest suspension rate of Black children ever. Not because the schools have done good practices that they put into place to ensure that children are engaged, not because teachers went through the proper training so that they could address their biases, not because we've changed policies or structures, but simply because they weren't in the classroom to be suspended by their teachers. And I think that is an incredibly sad point. And it's why the work that we do, and I'm part of a cadre of educators who are focused on the connection between Black lives and Black minds. And we believe that those are directly intertwined. If you don't value someone's life, then you certainly will not value their mind. And when we talk about how our Black children are unfortunately engaged by educators, we know that they are more likely to be referred for discipline. They're more likely to be suspended. They're more likely to be expelled. They're more likely to be restricted in having access to extracurricular activities. They're significantly overrepresented in special education as a unfortunate dumping ground for them. And when you piece this all together on top of, again, a health pandemic, then we have to realize that we're not okay. The community is not doing well. And the only limited saving grace right now is that at least they're not in being taught in environments that are predominantly not, white spaces. They're in environments now where at least they're at home, but that doesn't say much for the education that can take place right now.
Thank you. That is incredibly disheartening as a mother of 2 Black sons. And so what are some of the ways that inclusion and culturally affirming practices can be promoted in the virtual classroom during this time?
So there's actually a lot of ways that it can be promoted. In fact, me and my colleagues have spent the better part of the spring semester and summer now doing a series of webinars talking about what that looks like in terms of cultural relevance, in terms of being intrusive or high touch with students, being responsive to needs that they might have. And really, it's just intentionality and a desire to do something different. You can teach a class in totally different ways. You can teach a lesson in totally different ways. But how we think about it is it's the difference between a window education and a mirror education. And this is a concept that comes from scholars in reading. So in scholars in reading talk about a window book and a mirror book. So a window book is a book that a child reads that has characters and storylines and ideas that are like looking out through a window into someone else's life. Whereas a mirror book is when a child has the opportunity to read a book that has, again, characters and stories and ideas and concepts that reflect them and their lives and their daily experiences. And so what we need are mirror artifacts in the virtual classroom. It can be if the teacher is using PowerPoint or Prezi, that there's images that are diverse and reflective. It can be the books that they're using. Are they books that are representative of diverse communities. Now there's real diversity and then there's faux pas diversity. And unfortunately, we have some knockoffs. What most people would be surprised is that there is a study that was done by a scholar named Donna Ford, and it showed that like somewhere upwards of 75% of children's books that are focused on Black children are written by non-Black authors, right? So just because it looks like a Black book doesn't mean it is. We have some knockoffs as well. But again, the lesson plans, the curriculum, the books themselves have to be reflective of the daily lives and experiences of people who come from those communities. But that wouldn't be enough in and of itself, because you can still have education taught in a way that doesn't convey what the most important thing is, which is love. Now, there's a scholar, a professor, who's since passed away, named Asa Hilliard, and he was a psychologist, an Afrocentric scholar, just a prolific and brilliant man. And one of the things that he said after years of studying the experiences of Black children in the classroom, he said, there's no mystery on how to teach them. The first thing you do is treat them like human beings. And the second thing you do is love them. And so what we focus on is trying to convey to educators what that looks like. Because if you think of someone as being, their life is being lesser than, then their mind is lesser than, how do you love that person? And what we try to do is to teach them, you connect with them, you show interest in them, you validate them, you reach out to them proactively. If something's going wrong, you don't allow it to continue to go wrong, you intercede, but you do so in a way that demonstrates that you care. And it's those simple things that really can turn around an education for children. But the truth is, just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's easy, because it's very difficult for people who have been raised in a society that perceives people from my community as lesser than to buck that and to engage them in a very different way. The other thing that I would say is 3 letters, I-T and S. Right now, we know that bias is more likely to be manifested than any other time. If we think about the COVID pandemic, the racial pandemic, it's not surprising that the racial pandemic has the awareness of it is more heightened right now, because we know that bias manifests itself when there are 3 conditions that are in place. First, when we have incomplete information. 2, when our time is constrained. And 3, when we're experiencing stress or a heightened emotional state. So think about it. Incomplete information, time is constrained, experiencing stress. That exemplifies this current moment, and therefore exemplifies why we're seeing even greater issues of bias manifesting now than we would see normally.
Thank you. That's a lot to think about. We are going to transition to our audience question time now. And so we won't be able to get to all of the questions due to time constraints, but we will try to get to as many as possible. So a reminder to our panelists to not only speak slowly, but to also, we want to try to get through as many questions as possible. So to be as brief as possible as you can. So our first question is for Nyota Watts. Beyond donating, how can people get involved in removing police out of the SDSU, out of San Unified?
So thank you. This is Nyota Watts speaking, and we have actually in the call to action at the end of this, I will be having the link to the petition put into the chat so that you guys could sign the petition to get more pressure put onto the San Diego Unified School District so that we could push to get the police officers out of our schools. And then not only that, you could follow us on our Instagram account at Defund School PD with the dot before the PD, and basically find out any information there. We will be continuously updating you guys on how you guys can help. But also on July 8th, we will be holding our own town hall meeting. You could find our town hall link on that Instagram account as well, and you guys can find more information there on how to help defund school PD.
Thank you. Our next question is for Melissa. What online resources could the family of a student with a disability access during this pandemic if the school district is having difficulty providing guidance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I would first advise the family member or the student to contact your school and or district's Office of Special Education to see what online resources they suggest. But I did happen to just have poked around right now as we were speaking on the CDE, the California Department of Education's website that has a lot of guidance specific to students with special needs in light of the pandemic. And there is a lot of many links to various resources that include things like resources for students and also model policies that parents can advocate for. So I would suggest looking at the CDE website also.
Thank you. This is for any one of the panelists to answer. Can you speak about food provision for students by California schools? What might happen if schools stay closed for much longer than anticipated?
I can just share some general thoughts. So many of us know, California has one of the highest percentages of low-income students on free or reduced lunch in the nation. Here in LA, right, it's over 60, 70%, 90% at some schools. And without those meals, students do not receive the nourishment. So the good news is the state leaders have taken good steps in addressing those gaps. And then school districts themselves are taking leadership. And I would just say, community members, parents, even students, have a right to just demand that their school districts continue to provide that and meet those needs, because it's really essential. And also just want to give a shout out to organizations like the Black Panther Party that are the reason why we have free and reduced lunch programs in our schools in the first place, or breakfast programs. So the community has to raise the voice.
Thank you. This next question is for whoever would like to take it. Do school districts need to fund access to technology in communities of color? For example, internet access to facilitate remote learning during the pandemic?
I can take that. Yes. The school is responsible for ensuring that a child has the resources that they need to learn. That is a basic function of any school. And so in an online environment, if access to technology and the resources that are associated with that are needed for the basic function of what they do, then it shouldn't be a question. If a family has need and doesn't have the means to be able to provide it for themselves, the school should be providing it for them proactively. And it shouldn't be waiting until there's a challenge. They should be reaching out now, finding out what is going on, and then making those purchases. Let me give you an example of, just really quick, Chaffey College. It's a community college in Rancho Cucamonga. The minute COVID happened, you know what they did? They went and they bought 5,000 computers and they gave them out to their students immediately. They didn't wait for someone to tell them it was the right thing to do. They just knew it was the right thing to do and they did it. That's the kind of leadership that we need.
Is it okay if I go ahead and add on to that really quick?
Of course.
I'm actually a college student, so I just actually graduated from Cuyamaca Community last semester, and I just want to uplift the fact that I do come from a low-income background. I do come from a low-income household, so it was extremely hard being able to fund internet access within my household, as I was a student worker, so I worked on campus, and right when campus closed, I basically lost my job, so I basically had no money to fund from internet access. My mom was the only worker in the house after my brother lost his job as well as a result to COVID. So it just seems as if it is actually a responsibility of the school to fund this. I was emailing professors constantly telling them I don't have internet access, I can't get this assignment in, I can't do this, I can't do that. And I was constantly, ignored within my emails. And at last I did graduate, and I was able to graduate on Dean's List, but that was just by mere luck. So if it was a result of me as a college student myself struggling so much, imagine how hard it is for high school students who did not have access to those resources as well, and to students in middle school and so on and so forth. So it definitely is the responsibility of the school to provide internet access and to provide computers for children so they're able to do their schoolwork, because it was extremely hard being able to shift to online classes, but also trying to find out the stress of having to find out how I'm going to pay for the next month's internet bill and so on and so forth was even more. So schools should definitely take on that responsibility.
Thank you. And thank you for that reminder that it's not only impacting our K through 12 system, but also our higher education system, that there are responsibilities there as well.
Can I add really quick also?
Sure, Warsan.
Yeah. I just want to, I think it kind of, it's kind of already said, but I really want to point out that if, as an institution, as schools, I think they should be aspiring to address inequities. And when we say, oh, half of our students don't have access to technology, but we are going to go ahead and continue as usual, then that means you're ignoring the inequities that exist, and the fact that you're leaving behind low-income communities, students from those low-income communities. Similar story, I didn't have access to internet until I was in high school. We had like one big computer, family computer in the living room that we had to share. I didn't really have a laptop until I was in my third year of college. So I just want to point out that the COVID-19 and the exacerbation of inequities that come with it are extremely affecting low-income communities. And when institutions and systems ignore that, then that means we are ignoring low-income communities and communities that are already struggling and facing those inequities.
Thank you. And this next question, Warsan, Nyota Watts, Amir, how might associate student bodies, ASBs, be utilized to expand student voice during this time?
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'll share what our students did. The Pomona Student Union did up here in LA County a few months ago. They saw that their district wanted to spend $2 million of the LCAP LCFF funds on police, yet there were counselors split between 4 schools, basically going to each school for one day. And there were no social workers in the schools and different things. So the Pomona Student Union reached out to us along with an organization called Gente Organizada. And we worked with them to go to their school board meeting and demand that the schools divest or not spend that $2 million on police and instead invest it in counselors. And I'll just share what a student said so beautifully. She said she didn't understand how a police officer was going to help her learn English. She told the school board that. And under California law, supplemental and concentration funds, just this category of funding, it has to be spent on English learners, low-income youth or youth in the foster care system. And police do not help either of those students. So students have a lot of voices. So going directly to the school board meetings, emailing school board members. Here in LA yesterday, we had a Twitter storm on some of the school board members, and that helped us get a vote to help defund the police. So students have a lot of power.
And just to add on, this is Nyota. I was actually in my associated student body back in high school, and I was also in the site governance team, but they always stress how you could always bring more ASB students to those meetings. So I definitely would stress that, like Amir had said, go to those school board meetings, go to this, go to that, go to the next, because of the fact that, your voice does matter, and you do get change within numbers. So the more of you guys who go up there and, rally for change and who say something will actually cultivate real change. So put the stress on Cindy Martin, put the stress on people in our school board and so on and so forth. Get them to actually hear your voice, because your site governance teams, your administration at your schools, they will hear it, but you can't always rely on them to relay the message over. So continue emailing, take the initiatives yourself and get forward, and then you'll probably see change that way.
last thing that I would add is, in addition to going to your, school board members, going to the people who are in places of power to advocate for your fellow students, the people who elected you to represent them, right? In addition to that, make sure that you're also going to the students that you're representing and asking them what their needs are, what issue that they're facing. Because we also recognize a lot of times student bodies themselves are not the most diverse places in school. They lack the voices of students of color, minority students, and so on and so forth. So ensuring that if you are a student yourself who's in a place of power, and you have that access with people who are in power, make sure that you're also not forgetting the people that you represent.
Thank you. This next question is for Dr. Wood. This actually comes from a viewer on YouTube. As a white teacher, how can I better support my students of color?
Well, I think you have to first support them as students of color. Recognizing that if you're engaging them, treating them, talking to them in the same ways that you do with other students, and having a kind of, I treat everyone the same perspective, then you're probably missing the mark. But seeing instead their differences as strengths, their perspectives, their experiences as opportunities to learn more about them, and then leverage that learning experience, and then leverage that to enhance their learning experience. The other thing is, students of color are really good at identifying people who are inauthentic, because too often we experience people who support us but then don't really. So what I find is that if you demonstrate authentic care, then you'll have a different type of relationship with them than you're used to. So now, authentic care, let me say what that looks like. It's like a shared or vested interest, where if the student does well, if they succeed, if they hit the mark, if they're successful, that you are going to personally feel like you are successful. And similarly, if they don't do well, if they stumble, if they fall, if they miss the mark, that you are going to personally feel like you missed the mark, because you have such a shared or linked vested interest with them and how they're doing. And it's that type of relationship that's necessary to advance success for students, of course, of any background, but in particular, it has an intensified benefit for our students from minoritized communities.
Thank you. And that will be our last question from the audience. We will now transition to our closing statements from our panelists. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give their closing words for the evening. And as we have done on each of our previous webinars, we've also asked each panelist to share a call to action for folks in our audience tonight that they can take once they log off this webinar. So we will begin with Amir.
Hi, it's Amir here. First of all, thank you all for even hosting this conversation, especially at this moment in history during Freedom Summer 2020. So, my recommendation, call to action would just be for folks to keep up this momentum. Go out, attend protests but if you're able to, right, go out there in the street, but also be aware that our county board of supervisors and our county government actually has some funds for mental health in schools as well, through what's called Proposition 63, a tax that was passed many years ago, this Mental Health Services Act. So maybe the action is reach out to your county board of supervisors and tell them to invest those funds, millions of dollars that they have, I'm sure, in San Diego and Imperial counties, to unlock those funds and send them to schools to increase mental health support.
Thank you. Nyota Watts.
So I first want to thank you guys so much for allowing me to be on this panel. It's just the greatest feeling ever to be with such like-minded people. But so for my call to actions, actually, one of our fellow organizers for the Defund SDUSD PD, her name is Noon Abdelaziz. She actually was a victim of medical racism just last week. She actually suffered a seizure, and the staff at Scripps Hospital was ignoring her. The EMTs that took her to the hospital were just disregarding her pain, thinking that she was lying and joking. So she actually does have a there's actually a call to action that's posted so that we could go and call and complain on her behalf so that we could actually get these staff members held responsible for their actions. And so that will be linked right over there. And then we also have a GoFundMe for a woman in the Sudanese Black Muslim community of San Diego. Her name is Arafa Matar. She was actually a victim of medical racism as well, but unlike Noon, she was not able to, she succumbed to her pain, so she actually passed away. And there actually is a GoFundMe on her behalf for her family as she left behind children and a husband. And so the GoFundMe is $15,000. There's $2,000 raised so far, but those funds will be used to help her husband, who has been out of work for a while as he is helping the children, and to also help one of her special needs children that she left behind as well. So please go ahead and donate to those and call the number to complain on Noon's behalf and get these Black women justice, as the medical system does not believe in Black women as much as they should, being that Black people do have some of the highest death with corona as well. You could see that there is a constant trend within the system that many of these medical fields and just a whole bunch of institutions in the United States of America as a whole do not care about Black bodies. So make sure you put pressure so they can actually hear our voices, and not only in the streets, but in the hospitals as well. So that's my closing statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Warsan.
First and foremost, thank you so much for having me here today. It's an honor to be here. If I can close with anything, I would say listen to young people and center their voices, listen to their lived experiences. I think a lot of times we assume that you're more smart because you're older and you have expertise, and we leave out the lived experiences of young people, especially system experienced young people. So make sure that we're listening to our young people and we're centering their voices. My call to action would be, as Amir mentioned earlier, to get involved in your local government. Right now, actually, the County Board of Supervisors, the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, is preparing their budget process. The budget process will be finalized in mid-August. So actually, from August 10th to the 19th would be county budget hearings. And I just want to point out that the budget money is our money, it's our tax dollars, right? So every single one of us has every right to demand what their needs and what they need in what we need in our community. So don't be hesitant. Don't I think a lot of times how mystified it is and foreign it is, this whole budget process scares people away from getting involved. And I just want to say that's our money. We pay taxes. They work for us. We elected them. So get involved. Get involved in your county board of supervisors. Again, they're going through their budget right now. That budget will be finalized towards the end of August, but in mid-August, from August 10th to the 19th, they will be holding budget hearings. So show up, come to those budget hearings, call in, submit online comments, and get involved. If you want to get more information on that, you can reach out to us at www.youthwill.org/get-involved. I think the link will be in the chat. If you want to get more information on that, just reach out to us and we will send you more information on it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Warsan. Melissa?
Yes, thank you for allowing me the honor of speaking here among these amazing panelists tonight. It was really an honor to hear from all of you. And my call to anyone listening is to please, I'd like to encourage anyone who believes that their legal rights have been violated at school, in San Diego, or in Imperial County, to please submit a legal request form to our office. And we are, I think, providing that, a link to it. And it's available on our website. And it's important for us that the community know that equity, including and especially, in fact, education equity is one of our priority areas. And we would really like to know what the education concerns are, what the issues are in both traditional district schools and including charter schools. And we would like to support you if we can. And so And my colleague Savannah Dudar is not on this panel with us tonight, but she works in the office as a policy associate and is also dedicated to education equity issues. So we certainly we want to hear from you. That's my call. And then I guess a general call is just to echo something Warsan said earlier, and that everyone has sort of captured, is give young people power already. Like, yes, we want to help you make that happen in any way that we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And Dr. Wood.
Again, thank you for the invitation and for this important conversation. I feel very blessed to have been on this panel with this group of colleagues who are doing amazing work. We have an online class that we offer. It's a web series this time that we've done it twice in a row. This will be the third time. It's called Black Minds Matter. And what we do is we draw parallels between the undervaluing and overcriminalization that happens in the streets with police to what we see in the classroom with teachers. And it's really meant as a way of showing that there is a linkage between that mistreatment and denigration, but also offers strategies and practices that educators can employ. It starts on July 16. We've got a really cool slate of people who are going to be participating, and again, it's open, it's free to the public, it's meant as a service, and so if anybody's interested in checking it out, we're fortunate we've had a good number of people who've signed up so far, and we're hoping for a good turnout for an important conversation because we believe that Black minds matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Amir, Melissa, Warsan, Dr. Wood, and Nyota Watts. Thank you for the information you shared, for taking time out of your day and evening to be with us tonight, and for the work that you continue to do in the community to ensure that students have an equitable education and access to resources and are set up for success. Thank you to Andrea Lust and Anthony Diaz and Andrea Rocha for supporting us with ASL and Spanish interpretation tonight. For those of you joining us, we hope that this webinar was informative and has inspired you to take action, especially around the actions that you heard from our panelists tonight, and which you can find in your chat. As you leave the webinar, you will be directed to take a survey. Please do share your feedback with us. This webinar is the last of our 5-part series, and we thank you to everyone who tuned in to learn more about the inequities that have risen to the surface, that have always existed, and that COVID has just laid bare for all to see. And we appreciate you taking the time to learn and act in advance on the injustices that we are facing right here in San Diego. It is all of our responsibility to work to do our part to flatten the curve of inequality. Have a great night.
Actually, I have one more thing. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention it. But
It's okay.
It's our change.org.
Let the youth have power.
It's our change.org petition to defund SDPD. We're currently at 2,826 signatures out of 5,000. So Savannah actually left the link in the chat box. So if you guys can go ahead and sign that, that's another call to action that I forgot to mention, which is one of the most important ones. I'm so sorry, but if you guys could sign that, that'd be great.
That's a great last word. Thank you. Have a good night, all.